A.3.9. What is anarcho-primitivism? As discussed in section 8.3.3, most anarchists would agree with situationist Ken Knabb in arguing that, open quote, in a liberated world, computers and other modern technologies could be used to eliminate dangerous or boring tasks, freeing anyone to concentrate on more interesting activities. Obviously, certain technologies, nuclear power is the most obvious example, are indeed so insanely dangerous that they will no doubt be brought to a prompt halt. Many other industries which produce absurd, obsolete, or superfluous commodities will, of course, cease automatically with the disappearance of their commercial rationales. But many technologies, however they may presently be misused, have few, if any, inherent drawbacks. It's simply a matter of using them more sensibly, bringing them under popular control, introducing a few ecological improvements, and redesigning them for human rather than capitalistic ends. End quote. Thus, most eco-anarchists see the use of appropriate technology as the means of creating a society which lives in balance with nature. However, a small but vocal minority of self-proclaimed green anarchists disagree. Writers such as John Zerzan, John Moore, and David Watson have expounded a vision of anarchism which, they claim, aims to critique every form of power and oppression. This is often called anarcho-primitivism, which, according to Moore, is simply, open quote, a shorthand term for a radical current that critiques the totality of civilization from an anarchist perspective and seeks to initiate a comprehensive transformation of human life. End quote. How this current expresses itself is diverse, with the most extreme elements seeking the end of all forms of technology, division of labor, domestication, progress, industrialism, what they call mass society, and, for some, even symbolic culture, i.e. numbers, language, time, and art. They tend to call any system which includes these features civilization, and, consequently, aim for the destruction of civilization. How far back they wish to go is a moot point. Some see the technological level that existed before the Industrial Revolution as acceptable. Many go further and reject agriculture and all forms of technology beyond the most basic. For them, a return to the wild, to a hunter-gatherer mode of life, is the only way for anarchy to exist, and they dismiss out of hand the idea that appropriate technology can be used to create an anarchist society based on industrial production which minimizes its impact on ecosystems. Thus, we find the primitivist magazine Green Anarchy arguing that those, like themselves, open quote, who prioritize the values of personal autonomy or wild existence have reason to oppose and reject all large-scale organizations and societies on the grounds that they necessitate imperialism, slavery, and hierarchy regardless of the purposes they may be designed for. They oppose capitalism as it is civilization's current dominant manifestation. However, they stress that it is civilization, not capitalism per se, was the genesis of systemic authoritarianism, compulsory servitude, and social isolation. Hence, an attack upon capitalism that fails to target civilization can never abolish the institutionalized coercion that fuels society. To attempt to collectivize industry for the purpose of democratizing it is to fail to recognize that all large-scale organizations adopt a direction and form that is independent of its members' intentions. Thus, they argue, genuine anarchists must oppose industry and technology, for hierarchical institutions, territorial expansion, and the mechanization of life are all required for the administration and process of mass production to occur. For primitivists, only small communities of self-sufficient individuals can coexist with other beings, human or not, without imposing their authority upon them. Such communities would share essential features with tribal societies. For over 99% of human history, humans live within small and egalitarian extended family arrangements while drawing their subsistence directly from the land. End quote. While such tribal communities which lived in harmony with nature and had little or no hierarchies are seen as inspirational, primitivists look forward to seeing, to use the title of a John Zerzan book, the future primitive. As John Moore puts it, open quote, "The future envisioned by anarcho-primitivism is without precedent. Although primitive cultures provide intimations of the future, and that future may well incorporate elements derived from those cultures, an anarcho-primitivist world would likely be quite different from previous forms of anarchy." End quote. For the primitivist, other forms of anarchism are simply self-managed alienation within essentially the same basic system we now endure. Hence Moore's comment that, open quote, "Classical anarchism wants to take over civilization, rework its structures to some degree, and remove its worst abuses and oppressions. However, 99% of life in civilization remains unchanged in their future scenarios precisely because the aspect of civilization they question are minimal. Overall, life patterns wouldn't change too much. Thus, from the perspective of anarcho-primitivism, all other forms of radicalism appear as reformist, whether or not they regard themselves as revolutionary." End quote. In reply, classical anarchists point out three things. Firstly, to claim that the worst abuses and oppressions account for 1% of capitalist society is simply nonsense, and, moreover, something an apologist of that system would happily agree with. Secondly, it is obvious that reading any classical anarchist text that Moore's assertions are nonsense. Classical anarchism aims to transform society radically from top to bottom, not tinker with minor aspects of it. Do primitivists really think that people who went to the effort to abolish capitalism would simply continue doing 99% of the same things they did beforehand? Of course not. In other words, it is not enough to get rid of the boss, although this is a necessary first step. Thirdly, and most importantly, Moore's argument ensures that his new society would be impossible to reach. So, as can be seen, primitivism has little or no bearing to the traditional anarchist movement and its ideas. The visions of both are simply incompatible, with the ideas of the latter dismissed as authoritarian by the former, and anarchists questioning whether primitivism is practical in the short term or even desirable in the long. While supporters of primitivism like to portray it as the most advanced and radical form of anarchism, others are less convinced. They consider it as a confused ideology which draws its followers into absurd positions and, moreover, is utterly impractical. They would agree with Ken Knabb that primitivism is rooted in, open quote, "fantasies which contain so many obvious self-contradictions that it is hardly necessary to criticize them in any detail. They have questionable relevance to actual past societies and virtually no relevance to present possibilities. Even supposing that life was better in one or another previous era, we have to begin from where we are now. Modern technology is so interwoven with all aspects of our life that it could not be abruptly discontinued without causing a global chaos that would wipe out billions of people." End quote. The reason for this is simply that we live in a highly industrialized and interconnected system in which most people do not have the skills required to live in a hunter-gatherer or even agricultural society. Moreover, it is extremely doubtful that 6 billion people could survive as hunter-gatherers even if they had the necessary skills. As Brian Morris notes, open quote, "The future we are told is primitive. How this is to be achieved in a world that presently sustains almost 6 billion people, for evidence suggests that the hunter-gatherer lifestyle is only able to support 1 or 2 people per square mile, primitivists like Zorzan do not tell us." Most anarchists, therefore, agree with Chomsky's summation that, open quote, "I do not think that they are realizing that what they are calling for is the mass genocide of millions of people because of the way society is now structured and organized. If you eliminate these structures, everybody dies. And unless one thinks through these things, it's not really serious." End quote. Somewhat ironically, many proponents of primitivism agree with its critics that the Earth would be unable to support 6 billion living as hunter-gatherers. This, critics argue, gives primitivism a key problem in that population levels will take time to fall, and so any primitivist rebellion faces 2 options. Either it comes about via some kind of collapse of civilization, or it involves a lengthy transition period during which civilization and its industrial legacies are decommissioned safely, population levels drop naturally to an appropriate level, and people gained the necessary skills required for their new existence. The problems with the first option should be obvious, but sadly, it is implied by many primitivist writers. Moore, for example, talks about when civilization collapses, through its own volition, through our efforts, or a combination of the two. This implies an extremely speedy process, which is confirmed when he talks about the need for positive alternatives to be built now as, open quote, the social disruption caused by collapse could easily create the psychological insecurity and social vacuum in which fascism and other totalitarian dictatorships could flourish, end quote. Social change based on collapse, insecurity, and social disruption does not sound like a recipe for a successful revolution. Then there are the anti-organization dogmas expounded by primitivism. Moore is typical, asserting that, open quote, organizations for anarcho-primitivists are just rackets, gangs for putting a particular ideology in power, and reiterates the point by saying primitivists stand for the abolition of all power relations, including the state and any kind of party or organization, end quote. Yet, without organization, no modern society could function. There would be a total and instant collapse which would see not only mass starvation, but also ecological destruction as nuclear power stations melt down, industrial waste seeps into the surrounding environment, cities and towns decay, and hordes of starving people fighting over what vegetables, fruits, and animals they could find in the countryside. Clearly, an anti-organization dogma can only be reconciled with the idea of a near-overnight collapse of civilization, not with a steady process towards a long-term goal. Equally, how many positive alternatives could exist without organization? Moore dismissed any critique that points out that a collapse would cause mass destruction as, open quote, just smear tactics, weird fantasies spread by some commentators hostile to anarcho-primitivism who suggest that the population levels envisaged by anarcho-primitivists would have to be achieved by mass die-offs or Nazi-style death camps. The commitment of anarcho-primitivists to the abolition of all power relations means that such orchestrated slaughter remains an impossibility as well as just plain horrendous, end quote. Yet, no critic is suggesting that primitivists desire such a die-off or seek to organize it. They simply point out that the collapse of civilization would result in a mass die-off due to the fact that most people do not have the skills necessary to survive it, nor could the earth provide enough food for 6 billion people trying to live in a primitivist manner. Other primitivists have asserted that it can, stating, open quote, it is not possible for all 6 billion of the planet's current inhabitants to survive as hunter-gatherers, but it is possible for those who can't to grow their own food in significantly smaller spaces, as has been demonstrated by permaculture, organic gardening, and indigenous horticulture techniques, end quote. Unfortunately, no evidence was provided to show the truth of this assertion, nor that people could develop the necessary skills in time, even if it were. It seems a slim hope to place the fate of billions on so that humanity can be wild and free from such tyrannies as hospitals, books, and electricity. Faced with the horrors that such a collapse would entail, those primitivists who have thought the issue through end up accepting the need for a transition period. John Zerzan, for example, argues that it, open quote, seems evident that industrialization and the factories could not be gotten rid of instantly, but equally clear that their liquidation must be pursued with all the vigor behind the rush of breakout. Even the existence of cities is accepted, for cultivation within the cities is another aspect of practical transition, end quote. However, to accept the necessity of a transition period does little more than expose the contradictions within primitivism. Zerzan notes that, open quote, the means of reproducing the prevailing death ship, for example, its technology, cannot be used to fashion a liberated world. He ponders, what would we keep? Labor-saving devices? Unless they involve no division of labor, for example, a lever or incline, this concept is a fiction. Behind the saving is hidden the congealed drudgery of many and the despoliation of the natural world. How this is compatible with maintaining industrialization and the factories for a non-specified period is unclear. Similarly, he argues that instead of the coercion of work and how much of the present could continue without precisely that coercion, an existence without constraints is an immediate central objective. End quote. How that is compatible with the arguing that industry would be maintained for a time is left unasked, never mind unanswered. And if work continues, how is this compatible with the typical primitivist dismissal of traditional anarchism, namely that self-management is managing your own alienation and that no one will want to work in a factory or in a mine, and therefore coercion will have to be used to make them do so? Does working in a self-managed workplace somehow become less alienating and authoritarian during a primitivist transition? It is an obvious fact that the human population size cannot be reduced significantly by voluntary means in a short period of time. For primitivism to be viable, world population levels need to drop by something like 90%. This implies a drastic reduction of population which will take decades, if not centuries, to achieve voluntarily. Given that it is unlikely that almost everyone on the planet will decide not to have children, this timescale will almost certainly be centuries, and so agriculture and most industries will have to continue, and an exodus from the cities would be impossible immediately. Likewise, reliable contraceptives are a product of modern technology, and consequently, the means of producing them would have to be maintained over that time, unless primitivists argue that along with refusing to have children, people will also refuse to have sex. Then there is the legacy of industrial society, which simply cannot be left to decay on its own. To take just one obvious example, leaving nuclear power plants to melt down would hardly be eco-friendly. Moreover, it is doubtful that the ruling elite will just surrender its power without resistance, and consequently, any social revolution would need to defend itself against attempts to reintroduce hierarchy. Needless to say, a revolution which shunned all organization and industry as inherently authoritarian would not be able to do this. It would have been impossible to produce the necessary military supplies to fight Franco's fascist forces during the Spanish Revolution if the workers had not converted and used their workplaces to do so, to note another obvious example. Then there is another key contradiction. For if you accept that there is a need for a transition from here to there, then primitivism automatically excludes itself from the anarchist tradition. The reason is simple. Moore asserts that, open quote, mass society involves people working, living in artificial, technologized environments, and being subject to forms of coercion and control, end quote. So, if what primitivists argue about technology, industry, and mass society are all true, then any primitivist transition would, by definition, not be libertarian. This is because mass society will have to remain for some time, at the very least decades, more likely centuries, after a successful revolution, and consequently, from a primitivist perspective, be based on forms of coercion and control. There is an ideology which proclaims the need for a transitional system which will be based on coercion, control, and hierarchy, which will, in time, disappear into a stateless society. It also, like primitivism, stresses that industry and large-scale organization is impossible without hierarchy and authority. That ideology is Marxism. Thus it seems ironic to classical anarchists to hear self-proclaimed anarchists repeating Engels' arguments against Bakunin as arguments for anarchy. See section 8.4 for a discussion of Engels' claims that industry excludes autonomy. So if, as seems likely, any transition will take centuries to achieve, then the primitivist critique of traditional anarchism becomes little more than a joke and a hindrance to meaningful anarchist practice and social change. It shows the contradiction at the heart of primitivism. While they attack other anarchists for supporting technology, organization, self-management of work, industrialization, and so on, they are themselves dependent on the things they oppose as part of any humane transition to a primitivist society. And given the passion with which they attack other anarchists on these matters, unsurprisingly, the whole notion of a primitivist transition period seems impossible to other anarchists. To denounce technology and industrialism as inherently authoritarian and then turn around and advocate their use after a revolution simply does not make sense from a logical or libertarian perspective. Thus, the key problem with primitivism can be seen. It offers no practical means of achieving its goals in a libertarian manner. As Nab summarizes, open quote, what begins as a valid questioning of excessive faith in science and technology ends up as a desperate and even less justified faith in the return of a primeval paradise, accompanied by a failure to engage the present system in any but an abstract apocalyptical way. To avoid this, it is necessary to take into account where we are now, and consequently, we will have to seriously consider how we will deal with all the practical problems that will be posed in the interim. End quote. Sadly, primitivist ideology excludes this possibility by dismissing the starting point any real revolution would begin from as being inherently authoritarian. Moreover, they are blocking genuine social change by ensuring that no mass movement would ever be revolutionary enough to satisfy their criteria. Open quote. Those who proudly proclaim their total opposition to all compromise, all authority, all organization, all theory, all technology, etc., usually turn out to have no revolutionary perspective whatsoever, no practical conception of how the present system might be overthrown or how a post-revolutionary society might work. Some even attempt to justify this lack by declaring that a mere revolution could never be radical enough to satisfy their eternal ontological rebelliousness. Such all-or-nothing bombast may temporarily impress a few spectators, but its ultimate effect is simply to make people blasé. End quote. Then there is the question of the means suggested for achieving primitivism. Moore argues that the, open quote, kind of world envisaged by anarcho-primitivism is one unprecedented in human experience in terms of the degree and types of freedom anticipated, so there can't be any limits on the forms of resistance and insurgency that might develop. End quote. Non-primitivists reply by saying that this implies primitivists don't know what they want nor how to get there. Equally, they stress that there must be limits on what are considered acceptable forms of resistance. This is because means shape the ends created, and so authoritarian means will result in authoritarian ends. Tactics are not neutral, and support for certain tactics betray an authoritarian perspective. This can be seen from the UK magazine Green Anarchist, part of the extreme end of primitivism. Due to its inherent unattractiveness for most people, it could never come about by libertarian means, i.e. by the free choice of individuals who create it by their own acts, and so cannot be anarchist as very few people would actually voluntarily embrace such a situation. This led to Green Anarchist developing a form of eco-vanguardism in order, to use Rousseau's expression, to force people to be free. This was expressed when the magazine supported the actions and ideas of the non-anarchist Unabomber and published an article, The Irrationalists, by one of its editors stating that, open quote, the Oklahoma bombers had the right idea. The pity was that they did not blast any more government offices. The Tokyo CERN cult had the right idea. The pity was that in testing the gas a year prior to the attack, they gave themselves away. End quote. A defense of these remarks was published in the next issue, and a subsequent exchange of letters in the US-based Anarchy, a journal of Desire Armed magazine number 48-52, saw the other editor justify this sick authoritarian nonsense as simply examples of unmediated resistance conducted under conditions of extreme repression. Whatever happened to the anarchist principle that means shape the ends? This means there are limits on tactics, as some tactics are not and can never be libertarian. However, few primitivists take such an extreme position. Most primitivist anarchists, rather than being anti-technology and anti-civilization as such instead, to use David Watson's expression, believe it is a case of the affirmation of Aboriginal lifeways and of taking a far more critical approach to issues such as technology, rationality, and progress than that associated with social ecology. These eco-anarchists reject, open quote, a dogmatic primitivism which claims we can return in some linear way to our primordial roots, just as much as the idea of progress superseding both Enlightenment and counter-Enlightenment ideas and traditions. For them, primitivism reflects not only a glimpse at life before the rise of the state, but also a legitimate response to real conditions of life under civilization, and so we should respect and learn from Paleolithic and Neolithic wisdom traditions, such as those associated with Native American tribes and other Aboriginal peoples. While we cannot and would not want to abandon secular modes of thinking and experiencing the world, we cannot reduce the experience of life and the fundamental inescapable questions why we live and how we live to secular terms. Moreover, the boundary between the spiritual and the secular is not so clear. A dialectical understanding that we are our history would affirm an inspirited reason that honors not only atheistic Spanish revolutionaries who died for El Ideal, but also religious pacifist prisoners of conscience, Lakota ghost dancers, Taoist hermits, and executed Sufi mystics." End quote. Such primitivist anarchism is associated with a range of magazines, mostly US-based, like Fifth Estate. For example, on the question of technology, they argue that, open quote, while market capitalism was a spark that set the fire and remains at the center of the complex, it is only part of something larger. The forced adaptation of organic human societies to an economic instrumental civilization and its mass techniques, which are not only hierarchical and external, but increasingly cellular and internal. It makes no sense to layer the various elements of this process in a mechanistic hierarchy of first cause and secondary effects. End quote. For this reason, primitivists are more critical of all aspects of technology, including calls by social ecologists for the use of appropriate technology essential in order to liberate humanity and the planet. Open quote. To speak of technological society is in fact to refer to the techniques generated within capitalism, which in turn generate new forms of capital. The notion of a distinct realm of social relations that determine this technology is not only ahistorical and undialectical, it reflects a kind of simplistic base superstructure schema. End quote. Thus, it is not a case of who uses technology which determines its effects. Rather, the effects of technology are determined to a large degree by the society that creates it. In other words, technology is selected, which tends to reinforce hierarchical power, as it is those in power who generally select which technology is introduced within society, saying that oppressed people have this excellent habit of turning technology against the powerful, and technical change and social struggle are interrelated. See section D.10. Thus, even the use of appropriate technology involves more than selecting from the range of available technology at hand, as these technologies have certain effect regardless of who uses them. Rather, it is a question of critically evaluating all aspects of technology and modifying and rejecting it as required to maximize individual freedom, empowerment, and happiness. Few social ecologists would disagree with this approach, though, and differences are usually a question of emphasis rather than a deep political point. However, few anarchists are convinced by an ideology which, as Brian Morris notes, dismisses the, open quote, last 8,000 years or so of human history as little more than a source of tyranny, hierarchical control, mechanized routine devoid of any spontaneity. All those products of the human creative imagination, farming, art, philosophy, technology, science, urban living, symbolic culture, are viewed negatively by Zerzan in a monolithic sense. While there is no reason to worship progress, there is just as little need to dismiss all change and development out of hand as oppressive. Nor are they convinced by Zerzan's selective culling of the anthropological literature, end quote. Most anarchists would concur with Murray Bookchin, open quote. The ecology movement will never gain any real influence or have any significant impact on society if it advances a message of despair rather than hope, of a regressive and impossible return to primordial human cultures, rather than a commitment to human progress and to a unique human empathy for life as a whole. We must recover the utopian impulses, the hopefulness, the appreciation of what is good, what is worth rescuing in Yum civilization, as well as what must be rejected if the ecology movement is to play a transformative and creative role in human affairs. For without changing society, we will not change the disastrous ecological direction in which capitalism is moving, end quote. In addition, a position of turning back the clock is deeply flawed, for while some Aboriginal societies are very anarchistic, not all are. As anarchist anthropologist David Graeber points out, open quote, we know almost nothing about life in Paleolithic other than the sort of thing that can be gleaned from studying very old skulls. But what we see in more recent ethnographic records is endless variety. There were hunter-gatherer societies with nobles and slaves. There are agrarian societies that are fiercely egalitarian. Even in Amazonia, one finds some groups who can justly be described as anarchists, like the Piaroa, living alongside others, say the warlike Xerente, who are clearly anything but, end quote. Even if we speculate, like Zerzan, that if we go back far enough, we would find all of humanity in anarchistic tribes, the fact remains that certain of these societies did develop into statist propertarian ones, implying that a future anarchist society that is predominantly inspired by and seek to reproduce key elements of prehistoric forms of anarchy is not the answer, as civilization may develop again due to the same social or environmental factors. Primitivism confuses two radically different positions, namely support for a literal return to primitive lifeways and the use of examples from primitive life as a tool for social critique. Few anarchists would disagree with the second position, as they recognize that current does not equal better and, consequently, past cultures and societies can have positive as well as negative aspects to them which can shed light on what a genuinely human society can be like. Similarly, if primitivism simply involved questioning technology along with authority, few would disagree. However, this sensible position is, in the main, subsumed within the first one, the idea that an anarchist society would be a literal return to hunter-gatherer society. That this is the case can be seen from primitivist writings. Some primitivists say that they're not suggesting the Stone Age as a model for their desired society, nor a return to gathering and hunting, yet they seem to exclude any other options by their critique. So to suggest that primitivism is simply a critique of some sort of anarchist speculation, to use John Moore's term, seems incredulous. If you demonize technology, organization, mass society, and civilization as inherently authoritarian, you cannot turn around and advocate their use in a transition period or even in a free society. As such, the critique points to a mode of action and a vision of a free society, and to suggest otherwise is simply incredulous. Equally, if you praise foraging bands and shifting horticultural communities of past and present as examples of anarchy, then critics are entitled to conclude that primitivists desire a similar system for the future. This is reinforced by the critiques of industry, technology, mass society, and agriculture. Until such time as primitivists clearly state which of the two forms of primitivism they subscribe to, other anarchists will not take their ideas that seriously. Given that they fail to answer such basic questions of how they plan to deactivate industry safely and avoid mass starvation without the workers' control, international links, and federal organization they habitually dismiss out of hand as new forms of governance, other anarchists do not hold much hope that it will happen soon. Ultimately, we are faced with the fact that a revolution will start in society as it is. Anarchism recognizes this and suggests a means of transforming it. Primitivism shies away from such minor problems and, consequently, has little to recommend it in most anarchists' eyes. This is not to suggest, of course, that non-primitivist anarchists think that everyone in a free society must have the same level of technology. Far from it. An anarchist society would be based on free experimentation. Different individuals and groups will pick the way of life that best suits them. Those who seek less technological ways of living will be free to do so, as will those who want to apply the benefits of appropriate technologies. Similarly, all anarchists support the struggles of those in the developing world against the onslaught of capitalist civilization and the demands of capitalist progress. For more on primitivist anarchism, see John Zerzan's Future Primitive, as well as David Watson's Beyond Bookchin and Against the Mega Machine. Ken Knobb's essay, The Poverty of Primitivism, is an excellent critique of primitivism, as is Brian Oliver Shepard's Anarchism versus Primitivism.